A small private plane with falsified registration numbers flew due west toward the Bahamas. At 4,000 feet, it was all but invisible to civilian radar. The skies were clear, the sea was calm, and the U.S. Coast Guard vessels that normally patrolled this part of the North Atlantic were busy with hurricane recovery operations. Smugglers lived for days like this. The plane's left engine stumbled, and its pilot cursed. He'd flown enough Beechcraft barons to recognize the problem. Bad fuel. The goddamn canister had probably been sitting on the beach since the first hurricane. That was the hazard of avoiding real airports. Hang in there, Betty. He reached out and patted the dashboard, as if physical reassurance could help it reach that unmarked runway in the Florida swamps. The cargo he carried, listed on the manifest as coffee beans, wouldn't bring enough dough for a new plane, but it should clear his debts. Then he could get out of the drug-running game for good. Maybe buy a little place out in the Everglades. The right engine coughed, stuttering. A sharp noise came next, followed by the most frightening sound you could hear in a small plane. Silence. Shit. He trimmed for best glide, but it wouldn't buy much time. He scanned the horizon with a growing sense of desperation. Nothing but water. The Beechcraft might float if he set her down gently enough, maybe long enough for someone to find him. Of course, they'd also find several kilos of contraband inside. Well, jail time beat being eaten by sharks. He'd already set the radio to the emergency frequency, so he grit his teeth and made the call. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Single-occupant Beechcraft experiencing failure of both engines. He needed to give a location, but his GPS had died on a Costa Rica run last year. The damn compass was spinning like it was unhinged. I'm about 400 nautical miles northwest of Puerto Rico. His words stuck in his throat. A thin blanket of fog shrouded the horizon to the north. Emerging from the midst of it was a miracle. A small island. It was far off, but it might be reachable. He turned the plane gently in that direction, trying to save altitude. The engine sputtered back to life, startling him. A tinny voice crackled on the radio. Station calling unknown Beechcraft, please repeat your location. He did so while peering at the island through the fog. He'd almost swear he saw lights there, too. Golden lights. Unknown Beechcraft search and rescue are on the way. The engines died simultaneously, choking on the contaminated fuel. The plane was falling fast. He fought to keep it up. Not gonna make it, he gasped into the radio. There's an island at my 2 o'clock. Glowing lights. I'm coming down. Then the water rose up to meet him, and it all went black.
Realm presents The Triangle. Episode 1.
Tessa DeMont loved a good debris field, but she could have done without the mosquitoes. The private plane had crashed in a densely wooded conservation area along the Missouri River. It was 90 degrees here, even in late August, with humidity that turned the air into syrup. The trees were so thick she'd had to trek the last quarter mile on foot. Every time she stopped moving, a small cloud of mosquitoes drifted down around her. As the senior NTSB investigator on scene, DeMont could have remained at the base camp and let the junior staffers pick through the wreckage. No one suggested that, though. They knew how much she wanted to see the pieces of the puzzle as they'd fallen. The single-engine Piper Saratoga was less than a year old, but had crashed inexplicably on the final approach to the Spirit of St. Louis Airport. Every debris field told a story. Sometimes it was a deep crater from a high-speed impact. Sometimes it was a wide dispersal that said the airplane had broken apart in the air. Today, it was a narrow field, 700 meters long. No charring, but the air hung heavy with the fumes of airplane fuel. That ruled out one potential cause. The crunch of heavy boots on timber announced the arrival of one of her fellow investigators. Jones, she thought his name was? The NTSB rotated junior investigators on and off her team every few months or so. The good ones kept their mouths shut and stayed out of her way. Presumed Jones hadn't learned that yet. "What do you think?" She sighed. "About what?" "I'm guessing they lost engine power on the final approach. Maybe ran out of fuel." "Wrong," DeMont said. "Use your nose." "I thought that was oil." "It's fuel." He stared off in the direction of the river. "They could have hit a bird or something. There are blue herons down along the bank." "Wrong." "Sorry?" "The debris field suggests a controlled flight into terrain," she said. "Oh, right. Guess it was the pilot's fault." "I didn't say that." Jones looked confused. "He flew into the ground." "But why?" He shrugged. "He made a mistake." "There has to be a reason." Experienced pilots didn't just lose situational awareness on a routine flight. "We're missing something." She wouldn't leave until she figured out what. "Tessa DeMont?" The deep, unfamiliar voice caught her off guard. She turned to find a tall stranger shoving his way through the foliage from the direction of the base camp. He wore dark slacks and polished leather shoes, both poor choices for this kind of terrain. "Who are you?" she asked. "David Segarra." He looked Latino, but had no hint of an accent. A few touches of gray in his hair, which was cropped short. She put it all together. The shoes, the haircut, the posture, and made an educated guess. "You with the Air Force?" Scott AFB was about 50 miles to the east, but they shouldn't be interested in a private plane. "Navy, actually. Just retired." He smiled at her in a polite sort of way. "I wonder if I could have a moment of your time." DeMont gestured to the wreckage. "I'm kind of busy." "This won't take long, and it's important." He looked over at Jones, who took the hint and found something to inspect farther back in the woods. "You've got 5 minutes," DeMont said. "I'm investigating a plane crash." "So am I." "Well, this is..." Before he could finish, Jones came running back. "I found the instrument panel." "Show me." She followed him, not looking to see if the Navy man tagged along. She'd already forgotten his name. The battered panel had tumbled to the bottom of a muddy creek bed. The plane was too light to require a data recorder, so this might be their best chance of learning what had been happening in the cockpit before the plane went down. Jones heaved it over. "The pressure's set wrong." "Curious." She inspected the other gauges. "The glass on the vertical speed indicator is cracked." "Must have happened on impact." "None of the others are damaged." And the thing was, the VSI wasn't as essential as the other gauges. If you had to lose one, it might as well be the VSI. Which might mean... yes. The lever to switch the static ports was broken, and odds were that hadn't happened during the crash either. She drew a sharp breath. "Where are the bodies?" "They're with the coroner. Why?" She set out in the direction of the white canvas tent. Jones stammered a question that she didn't hear. The coroner had finished his on-site exam and already had the 2 bodies in their black zippered transport bags. That's usually what they did. Put the bodies in zippered bags and hope that it would help everyone on scene forget that they existed. Bodies never bothered her. It was the live ones she had trouble with. "Doctor, who was in the left seat?" she asked. The coroner consulted his clipboard and then tapped the body bag on the right. In the meantime, Jones and the Navy man had made their way to the tent, bemused looks on their faces. The latter had asked the former something under his breath. Jones mouthed the word, absolutely. Demont ignored them. Did he have any injuries on his right hand? The coroner started to unzip the body bag. Then he paused and glanced up at them, inquiring. Jones turned around so as not to look. The Navy man held fast. Demont mentally awarded him a point. The zipper purred open. Inside was a man. That's about all you could say after the trauma. The coroner lifted the right arm, which flapped unnaturally from at least 2 fractures. But the hand was clean. No lacerations or contusions. Damn. She stomped over to his work table to get the pilot's file. I thought maybe he broke the VMI himself. Why would he do that? Jones asked. Because the static ports were blocked. They had no instruments, and they were trying to land in the fog with no visibility. The co-pilot went to switch to alternate air, but the lever broke, so the pilot tried to crack a gauge to get air into the system. They'd get the 2 other gauges back, Jones said. Altimeter and airspeed. Which are all they'd need to land. That was what he was trying to do when they hit the ground. Or so I thought. A couple of the other junior investigators had arrived while she spoke. They watched her in rapt silence. You got all of that from a crack on a gauge? Asked the Navy man. Yes. Out of the blue, she remembered his name. Segarra. But I was wrong. She flipped to the pilot's biometric page. It was a good idea, Jones said. No, not about that. She pointed at the body. Check his left hand. The coroner moved around and obliged her. The left arm, mercifully, wasn't broken. But dried blood stained the fingers, and the knuckles were mottled with black and blue. Demont tapped the clipboard. He was left-handed. Oh my God, whispered one of the juniors. Jones shook his head. Unreal. Very impressive, Segarra said. I believe I have 3 minutes left, Miss Demont. He gestured toward the road, where a black SUV with tinted windows waited. They walked over in silence. The engine was still running. She opened the door and sighed at the embrace of cool air before hopping in. Segarra passed over a brown folder that she recognized as an NTSB case file. This is from a private plane that disappeared between the British Virgin Islands and Bermuda. 1 pilot, 2 passengers. He hesitated. A father and his 5-year-old daughter. She flipped the file open to the personnel section. The plane was a late-model Cessna, current on all inspections. The pilot had 1,500 hours of flying time on similar aircraft. Before that, he'd been in the Air Force. So that's why they're interested. Takeoff was uneventful, Segarra said. They were assigned to 12,000 feet, but for some reason leveled off at 10,000. Probably to stay below the cloud ceiling, so they could fly visually, she said. He was instrument rated. So am I, but I still like being able to see the horizon. Segarra harumphed, as if unconvinced. Other than that, it was a routine flight for the next hour. Then they had a strange conversation with air traffic control. Do you have the transcripts? Yes, but it's probably best if you hear it. He pressed a button on the SUV's stereo system, where a tiny thumb drive was already plugged into the accessory port. A man's voice boomed over the speakers. And I got a control, November 4-6 Charlie Sierra, come in. November 4-6 Charlie Sierra, and I got a control, go ahead. We're having navigational issues. There's something wrong with the Did you see that? Segarra paused it. Is that the father in the background? She asked. We think so. He was sitting in the co-pilot seat. Lucky for us, the pilot was still transmitting. See what? Down there, in the clouds. It's just clouds. There was something glowing, orange or gold. I don't see anything. The recording ended. Is that it? Demont asked. That's the final transmission from the pilot of November 4-6 Charlie Sierra. One of them saw something, she said. An orange light. So he said. Any idea what that was? No. It might not be terribly significant. Pilots and passengers saw all kinds of strange things at night. It's not much to go on. There's more. Sagara plucked out the thumb drive and replaced it with a larger one that had a biometric fingerprint reader. It glowed green at his touch. What you're about to hear was redacted from the official record of the incident.
November 4-6 Charlie Sierra, Bermuda Control. Do you read me? Hello? Is someone there?
It was a girl's voice, and she sounded young. Demont sat up straighter.
Last aircraft transmitting. Identify yourself. My name is Olivia. What's your name? Olivia? This frequency is reserved for air traffic control. I'm on an airplane, and I think we're in trouble.
Demont jabbed the pause button. I don't understand. What is this? Who's Olivia? We believe she's the 5-year-old daughter who was on the plane. And ATC is about to make that leap too. He resumed the playback.
Olivia? What plane are you on? Do you know its name? I don't know. Something Sierra? Is it November 4-6 Charlie Sierra? I think so. The pilot said that a lot. Can we speak to the pilot? I can't wake him up. I'm scared. Is there a grown-up aboard? Someone we can talk to? Sorry, I have to go. Mr. Babbitt says that it's time to land. Who is Mr. Babbitt?
The recording ended. ATC lost contact with the plane shortly after, Sagara said. They never found any wreckage. Jeez. Demont had listened to plenty of ATC recordings, but this one was chilling. She couldn't imagine what it must have been like for that little girl up in that plane and knowing it was going to crash, or how the ATC people felt when they realized they couldn't do anything to help. When did this happen? 5 years ago. 5 years? That was before she'd even joined the NTSB. No wonder I didn't recognize it. Why are you bringing it up now? Because multiple ships and airplanes have disappeared in the same approximate area in the 2 weeks since the hurricanes came through. Where? A stretch of ocean between Miami, Puerto Rico, and the island of Bermuda. Some people call it the Bermuda Triangle, I know. She cut him off, irritated. It's one of the most heavily traveled regions in the Northern Hemisphere. If you consider the numbers, the Triangle isn't any more dangerous than other places. It's different this time. Something has changed. Planes crash all the time. That doesn't make it significant. She reached for the door handle. Your 5 minutes are up. Just over 2 days ago, the USS Wasp went missing en route from San Juan to Turks and Caicos Islands. He paused. There were more than 1,000 sailors and Marines aboard. You lost an entire ship? Not just any ship. A state-of-the-art amphibious assault vessel. All right, maybe it was significant. What does this have to do with me? We're assembling a task force to figure out what happened. I want you on it. What were you before? She asked. He blinked. I'm sorry? Before you retired, what did you do? He cleared his throat like a man caught cheating at cards. I was Deputy Commander of Fleet Forces and Vice Admiral for the United States Navy. Top brass. Then you can probably have any investigator you want. I want the investigator who figured out that unlatched cowl fasteners brought down Air France 206, and who proved that a near miss over Chicago was due to the pilot's latex allergy. Those were her cases. He knew her cases. Why? Because we need the best. I'm not so good with people. A task force sounds like a lot of people. It's a small team, I promise. She stopped then and forced herself to really look at him. He must not have shaved in 2 days. There was gray in his whiskers. Beneath them, his face was drawn. She felt for him, but more important, he'd brought her a spectacular puzzle. All right, Vice Admiral. Let's find your battleship. Michael Hammond sat alone in his apartment, trying to work and failing spectacularly. The shoebox-sized flight recorder on his table looked like something out of an aircraft museum. The orange paint was scratched and faded, and you could barely make out the words, "Flight recorder, do not open," printed on top of the cylinder. He made quick work of the screws and gently pried the box open. That's when things got strange. The 2 data drives inside were too compact to be 20-year-old IDE drives. They looked like solid state, which had only come into use in the past few years. It didn't add up, but Chen, his FBI handler, had said this was urgent. He removed the first drive and plugged it into his rig. No signal. He flipped open the drive's cover and started checking the flash modules with a caliper. 90, 90, 90, 98. Gotcha. He pushed down the module and heard a soft click. He blew off the plugs again and connected them to his audio rig. Lovely spikes of color bloomed on his meters at 150 hertz. He brought up the speaker and heard a man's voice.
November 4-6 Charlie Sierra, Bermuda Control. Do you read me?
Hammond pumped a fist. Yes. He set the rig to record a copy of the streaming audio. Then he listened in growing horror as a little girl came on, apparently stranded on an airplane without any adults. He'd never heard anything like it. What the hell is this? The call sign sounded familiar, though. November 4-6 Charlie Sierra. It jogged a memory from years back when he was doing data ops for the NTSB. 10 minutes later, he'd found it. A plane that had gone missing 5 years ago en route to Bermuda. 5 years? It didn't make any sense. Either Agent Chen wanted to screw with him or something really strange was going on. Well, there was one way to find out. He found her number and pressed the call button before he lost his nerve.
This is Chen?
She sounded awake despite the hour. Hey, it's Michael, Michael Hammond.
I know. Any progress on the box?
Well, yeah, some. He felt a wave of uncertainty. Maybe I should have planned this out.
Hammond, it's 4 a.m. Please tell me you've got something.
I recovered the audio, but it doesn't make sense. The box looks like it's been in the ocean for decades. And she was so curt, so businesslike. Maybe she didn't even know. I know what plane it's from.
Hammond,
she began. So my question, Agent Chen, is how in the hell does an ancient black box contain audio from a plane that disappeared on its way to Bermuda 5 years ago? Silence. Chen?
Are you still in your apartment?
She finally asked. Yeah, of course.
Stay put and don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in a few hours.
The line went dead. The door intercom buzzed, jolting Hammond from a light doze. He hadn't intended to sleep. He looked at his watch. 6:20 a.m., too early for Chen. Maybe someone had pushed the wrong apartment button. He rubbed his eyes, woke up his laptop, and pulled up the surveillance feed from out front. Technically, he shouldn't have had access to the building's security cameras, but the super had asked for help setting them up. Hammond had figured he might as well get something out of it. Camera 1 showed a man he didn't recognize. Older guy, dark hair just starting to go gray, but his face was cast in shadow. He lifted his hand to hit the buzzer again. His trench coat parted enough to reveal a military uniform beneath. Brass glinted there. A lot of brass. Uh-oh. Hammond scrambled from his chair as the buzzer sounded again. He hit the button. Hello? Michael Hammond? He considered lying, but thought better of it. Speaking? My name is David Segarra. We need to talk. Hammond paused. About what? Something urgent. May I come up? He was half tempted to call Chen to see if she knew what this was about, but the man's tone demanded a quick response. Sure, I guess. He hit the buzzer. Then he looked down and realized he wasn't wearing any pants. Well, shit. He ran to the bedroom and grabbed a pair of jeans from the nearest pile, hopping back to the living room as he tugged them on. The knock came before he'd finished. 3 sharp staccato beats. He threw back deadbolt 1, then deadbolt 2, and opened the door. The uniform caught his attention first. Dark blue with gold buttons. For a moment, he was reliving the day the police officer had knocked on his door to deliver the terrible news. The memory hit him like a body blow, and suddenly he couldn't say a word. I apologize for the hour, Mr. Hammond. Segarra brushed past him, shrugging out of his trench coat. He eyed the already overburdened coat rack, pursed his lips, and folded the coat over his arm instead. He offered his hand. David Segarra. Michael Hammond. He shook it and noticed the gold star embroidered on the sleeve. Holy crap, an admiral. He shut the door and bolted it again. Sorry about the mess. I was expecting Agent Chen. Special Agent Chen has been briefed. Oh. It sounded like she might not be coming. Are you going to tell me what's going on? Segarra ignored his question and wandered over to look at the framed pictures on the wall. Rumor has it you're quite the expert at data recovery. Depends on who you ask, Hammond said. Wired magazine certainly thinks so. Segarra tapped the dusty frame-up of him on the cover when they'd called him the Data Whisperer. That was the year his company, Trilobite, had hit the top 100 list of tech companies. The same year he'd proposed to Amanda. Hammond shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable. That was a long time ago. I haven't done much since... He trailed off, refusing to finish the sentence. Since your fiancé died in an accident. It wasn't a goddamn accident, Hammond snapped. Who the hell does this guy think he is? Segarra furrowed his bushy eyebrows. The NTSB report indicated, I know what it says. Not the shuttle driver's fault, they'd concluded, despite the fact that he'd hit Amanda at more than 40 miles per hour. Hammond had been vocal in his criticism of the investigation. Too vocal, maybe, because Trilobite's NTSB contracts had suddenly gotten canceled. In his ensuing spiral, he'd lost the rest of his clients, his staff, everything but his talent for data recovery. Listen, son. The Admiral put a hand on his shoulder, just a brief touch, but it was strangely comforting. You've had a tough year. No one's denying it. Chen said you were the best, but I had to be sure. It was a test. I recovered the borked drive. Here's a copy of the audio. He held out the thumb drive. The Admiral made no move to take it. Did you listen to it? He asked. Enough to know what plane it was, but I'd never heard the part with the girl. That portion was redacted, Segarra said. But the plane disappeared in the same area as some other recent losses. I haven't heard about more losses. We are keeping them quiet until we know what's going on. Which is why I'm here, actually. He straightened and gave Hammond a piercing look. We need you, son. For what? Pack a bag, Sagara said. I'll explain when we get there. 5 hours later, it was glaringly obvious that this wouldn't be the Caribbean vacation Hammond was hoping for. Sagara's driver whisked them straight to the airfield, where C-20 Gulfstream waited with engines already running. They flew to Aguadilla, on the northwest tip of Puerto Rico. It was 85 degrees, humid, and pouring rain. A bright orange helicopter ferried them to San Juan, where they boarded a Coast Guard cutter for the choppy, nauseating ride out to sea. The tiny cabin made it worse, so Hammond stepped out on deck and gripped the rail with both hands. Sunlight danced on the azure waters, painfully bright even through his sunglasses. The warm ocean spray felt good on his face, though. You look green, Sagara said, joining him at the rail. I don't travel a lot by boat, Hammond answered. Try this. The Admiral held out a stick of foil-wrapped gum. Hammond shook his head. I can't eat anything. It'll help. Hammond doubted that, but he took the piece anyway and shoved it in his mouth. The taste was sharper than he'd expected. Not sweet, not minty, but an herbal undertone. What is this? Ginger? An old sailor's remedy. Sagara was chewing a piece himself. Helps to keep your eyes on the horizon, too. You get seasick? The Admiral gave him a tight smile. I spent most of my first deployment at the rail. Couldn't keep anything down. Geez, it got better, didn't it? It had to have, for Sagara to have risen so far. Somewhat. The gum helps. Ahead, green humps broke the horizon and resolved themselves into the upper points of a long island. The lush forested slopes ran down to the edge of white sand beaches. Hammond exhaled slowly. It looked like a goddamn postcard. St. Thomas, Sagara said. Is that where we're heading? We're heading to Water Island, actually. It's about 20 miles south. Never heard of it, Hammond said. He resisted adding, and it sounds made up. You wouldn't have. It's been mothballed since the 70s. So much for the dream of a Caribbean resort. I think I'm allergic to mothballs, Hammond said. It's just an expression, Hammond. The Army Corps of Engineers should have the place aired out by the time we get there. Aired out? Sounds delightful. The cutter veered southeast as they approached St. Thomas, away from the pristine beaches and toward a small, featureless island unadorned except for 2 massive concrete bunkers. It doesn't look like much, Hammond said. Those are the gun emplacements. The rest of the facility is underground. The captain blew his horn, 2 sharp blasts that nearly made Hammond wet himself. Christ, warn a guy, will ya? Get your bag, Sagara said. This is where we hop off. Hammond hustled into the cabin for his duffel. By the time he got it shouldered and got back to the rail, the cutter had drawn near a long aluminum dock. Behind it, rock cliffs 2 stories tall gave the island an unwelcoming facade, a far cry from the white sand beaches of nearby St. Thomas. The captain brought them in at a perfect angle and cut the power just right. The boat slid into position along the dock, with less than a foot between the aluminum and her starboard side. Hammond hurried off after the Admiral as he marched up the dock to greet 2 armed guards. A man and a woman in blue camouflage fatigues. Both of them wore guns at the hip and identical expressions of casual disinterest. They came to attention and saluted. Petty Officer Johnson, Petty Officer Miller. Sagara returned their salutes, then gestured at Hammond. This is Michael Hammond. May I see your ID, sir? Asked the female sailor. All business. Hammond fumbled out his passport and handed it over. The other sailor, a big dude, he had to be at least 6'6", loomed behind him. Mind if I pat you down, sir? I guess not. Oh. He cut off because it apparently wasn't a request. The man's efficient hands checked his waist, his legs, his pockets. The first sailor handed back his passport and rummaged through his duffel. She came up with Hammond's cell phone, which she deposited into a clear plastic bag. "That's, my phone," Hammond said. "He's clear," said the sailor, who patted him down. Hammond reclaimed his duffel and followed the Admiral up a short road to a concrete bunker with a steel door. "Am I gonna get my phone back?" "Eventually." Sagara put his palm on a flat black panel beside the door. Soft white light glowed around his fingers, then turned green. A buzzer sounded and the metal door swung open. "Welcome to Water Island." Like most Navy men, David Sagara wasn't bothered by tight spaces. That was going to come in handy here. The concrete walls were 2 feet thick all over, giving the interior spaces a boxy, crowded feel. Here and there he encountered signs of new renovations made over the last few days while he'd assembled the team. Like the biometric locks on the doors and the bundles of fiber optic cables that dangled from the ceiling on one side of the hallway. He followed the main corridor to the command center, with Hammond tiptoeing behind him like a nervous shadow. Tessa DeMont sat at the round table, headphones on, looking over a stack of NTSB reports. She snorted, shook her head, and scrawled something in the margin of one with a red Sharpie. Watertight black storage boxes were stacked 3 and 4 high against the walls around her. Sagara gestured at her. "Tessa DeMont, NTSB investigator." Then at Hammond. "Michael Hammond, audio engineer." DeMont didn't quite look at him but said, "Pleased to meet you." Hammond had gotten a sour look on his face the moment Sagara said NTSB. "Yeah, likewise." This was going to be a problem with Hammond, given his beef with the NTSB investigation of his fiancée's death. A commotion in the hallway pulled Sagara from that line of thought. He was about to investigate when a stranger walked in. He was white and probably in his mid-40s, judging by the receding hairline and softness around the middle. "Sorry I'm late. The big fella out there gave a hell of a frisking." He grinned and lowered his voice. "I must confess, I enjoyed it a little." "Oh my God," Hammond blurted out. "You're Alistair McBride." McBride spread his hands. "Guilty as charged." "What the hell are you doing here?" Sagara demanded. "Well, if it isn't Vice Admiral David Sagara." He approached and stopped about 6 inches too close for Sagara's comfort. "Lovely place you have here." Hammond intervened, offering McBride his hand. "I'm Michael Hammond. I've read your book." "Oh, a loyal reader," McBride said. "This take keeps getting better." Sagara groaned. Of all the civilians to stumble upon this investigation. McBride had made a name for himself as a conspiracy theorist in the popular media. The Bermuda Triangle was his favorite topic. "His books are garbage," DeMont said. Sagara hid his smile. Now there's a level-headed opinion. McBride opened his mouth wide in mock astonishment. "You wound me, madam. And who might you be?" "Tessa DeMont." He plucked the edge of the jacket draped across the back of her chair. "From the NTSB, I see. Of course, you'd say that." Hammond chuckled. "He has a point." "What line of work are you in, Michael?" McBride asked. "Data recovery. And as we've established, you have great taste in literature. Delightful, just delightful." McBride turned back to Sagara. "Well, Admiral, I'd say the gang's all here." Sagara kept his voice level. "This is a private investigation." "Is it now? Well, maybe you can use my help." "Your help?" "I'm an expert on the Bermuda Triangle. Some people might say the expert." "Who said this has anything to do with the Triangle?" Sagara asked. "Don't be coy with me, Admiral." "You know, he could be useful," Hammond began. "Stay out of this, Hammond." Sagara fixed his gaze on McBride. "This is my investigation, and I don't need you on it. Well then, McBride said, I suppose I should go. He turned to leave. Good riddance. Oh, I nearly forgot. McBride paused, withdrawing an envelope from his inside pocket. I believe this is from your superiors? Oh, hell. The envelope looked official, complete with the DoD seal on the front. Sagara ripped it open. There were phrases like asset to the investigation and to be shown every courtesy. Those, and the SecDef's signature at the bottom, confirmed his worst fears. You must have friends in high places. I suppose certain members of the Armed Services Committee feel that you need me after all, McBride said. Welcome aboard, Sagara said through gritted teeth. How very kind. McBride clapped him on the arm. Let's talk accommodations. Am I bunking with you? For once, Sagara was glad not to have his sidearm. Sagara gave everyone half an hour to settle in, mostly so that he could slip out and try calling Susan. Once the investigation started in earnest, all telecom would be monitored as a matter of record, even his sat phone. She was still mad at him. He knew that in 1 second from the way she said hello. The intuition of being married for more than 3 decades. I just wanted to check in. We're getting ready to start.
Where are you?
She asked. You know I can't say.
So you could be halfway around the world.
It's closer than you think, he promised.
I don't suppose you know when you're coming home?
It was a statement, not a question. He sighed. It's too soon to say.
If you can't tell me anything, why did you even call?
Damn, she was pissed. Not that he blamed her. When he'd retired a few months back, he'd promised he was done with the Navy. They were supposed to finish building the country house, spend more time together, and spoil the grandchildren. And then he'd gotten that damn call. I'm sorry. This is something I have to do.
Be careful.
He smiled because if she said that, there was hope for him yet. Love you. He hung up and marched back into the command center. Dumont sat in the same chair, working her way through the NTSB reports. Hammond was setting up his AV rig in the far corner, watching her but pretending not to. All right, fall in, Sagara said. Dumont took off her headphones. Hammond came over and took the chair farthest from her. McBride strolled in that moment. Oh, good, I'm just in time. He changed into a button-down shirt with a ridiculous purple bow tie. It was almost as if the man didn't want to be taken seriously. Sagara pressed his lips together. You all know why we're here? Since the hurricanes came through, we've lost 3 freighters, 5 airplanes, and an entire fishing fleet. I thought it was 4 planes, Hammond said. Another one dropped off radar last night. They've been out searching today, but it doesn't look good. What kind of plane? Dumont asked. A Britain-Norman Islander jet. We'll get into that later. First, we should cover the basics. The Navy has the lead in this investigation. Everything you see and hear is confidential. Nothing gets shared outside this room without written approval from myself or the DoD. He directed this last bit at McBride. The man chuckled. The government wants to hide something? Quelle surprise. There are national security implications. Oh, I'm sure. Sagara suppressed a wave of irritation. We're going to operate under the assumption that all these incidents are connected. That makes them equally important in figuring out the cause. We'll have access to any information we may need. Flight plans, passenger and crew manifests, ATC recordings, the works. ATC? McBride asked. Air traffic control. Hammond and Dumont said at the same time. They looked at each other, as if reassessing. A lot of what we need is here already. Sagara swept his arm to indicate the black storage containers. If there's something we need but don't have, I can put in a request, and it'll come with our next shipment. McBride rubbed his hands together like a man trying to start a fire. Well, let's see. I'd like all government records pertaining to the Kennedy assassination, the moon landing. Area 51? Hammond offered. McBride nodded. Area 51. It has to be relevant to the investigation, Segarra said. Maybe it is, and we just don't know how. Segarra closed his eyes and rubbed his temples with his fingertips. Lord, give me strength. Hammond finally spoke up. I have a question. How is it that the Navy is leading this investigation? Come again? Segarra asked. When there are incidents involving American aircraft, the NTSB is usually in charge. This is a special situation. How? Segarra hesitated. Dumont knew, but once he told the others, there was no turning back. Especially with McBride here. They need to know. 72 hours back, the USS Wasp went missing en route from San Juan to Turks and Caicos Islands. Is that a military ship? Hammond asked. It sounds, big. She's an amphibious assault vessel, and the lead ship of her class. Crewed by 1,036 sailors and a complement of 300 Marines. He didn't add that he knew many of them by name, having skippered the ship himself before his promotion. Hammond was aghast. How have we not heard about this? It's being kept under wraps for the moment, by order of the Secretary of Defense. Told ya, McBride said. Government secrecy. Until we know the nature of the threat, it's in everyone's best interest to avoid a panic, Segarra said. Even the sailors' families hadn't been notified. He hated that part. The excuses of radio silence might hold for another week, but after that, they'd start calling. What do we know about the battleship? Dumont asked. Warship, Segarra said. What? The Wasp is an amphibious assault vessel. A warship. The last battleships were decommissioned years ago. Fine, what do we know about the warship? It left San Juan 5 days ago, heading northeast to assist with recovery operations after the hurricanes. Segarra went to the smart board in the front of the room and pressed his palm flat against the soft material. It glowed green under his fingertips. He found the file he wanted and pulled it up. A U.S. Geological Survey map of the Triangle region, with Puerto Rico right in the middle. A red dashed line stretched northeast out of San Juan. This is the satellite position data for the Wasp. Why are there gaps in the tracking line? Dumont asked. The Wasp reported some issues with their real-time GPS, possibly due to the lingering storm, Segarra said. We didn't think much of it until they dropped out of contact. He traced the red dashed line to where it ended, smack dab between San Juan and Bermuda. Search and rescue? Dumont asked. They combed the region for 2 days. Segarra brought up another image, which overlaid the search grid onto the map. Every square was shaded, indicating search completion. That's a massive area, Hammond said. What do they find? Not a damn thing. How is that even possible? If I knew the answer to that, you wouldn't be here. To Tessa Dumont's great relief, the Admiral declared a break. She'd spent too much time sitting too close to too many people. Situations like this served as tense reminders of why she preferred working in the field. If she felt overwhelmed by people at a crash site, she could always walk away under the guise of investigation. Here on Water Island, she had no such relief. Even with Segarra's explanation, she couldn't help but feel that the NTSB should have the lead in this investigation. That was customary for the precise reason that the board didn't answer to government agencies. She scurried down the long concrete hallway, past the sleeping quarters to the mess hall in the center of the underground fortress. She liked this room. The real miracle was that the blocky appliances still worked. including the ancient drip coffee maker. Stacks of airtight ration containers lined the pantry walls. She found the one labeled coffee, pried off the lid, and inhaled deeply. God, yes. In 6 minutes, the coffee machine hissed and squelched, drizzling black gold into the glass carafe. The pleasant aroma filled the room. Hammond ran into the mess, grinning. I knew I smelled coffee. Then he saw her, and his smile fell. Oh, hey. I made 6 cups, DeMont said. Would you like some? No, I'm, good. He looked everywhere but in her direction. She found an ugly-ass brown mug in the cabinet and held it out to him. He hesitated, but then took it and let her pour. It smells good. Yeah. They stood in silence a minute, both of them blowing on their coffee in a futile effort to cool it. Hammond closed his eyes and breathed the fumes. How much do you know about the Bermuda Triangle? She asked, surprising herself. She wasn't usually one to start conversations. Maybe it's the coffee. Just what I've read on Wikipedia, I guess. He tried a sip, scalded himself, and cursed. Shit, that's hot. Do you really think something's going on here? Has to be. Navy ships don't just disappear. He saw the doubt on her face. Why? What do you think? I think it's a wild goose chase. How can you be so sure? She shrugged. People make mistakes. Wrong place at the wrong time in the wrong weather. It happens. So it's what? Just bad luck? Sometimes, she said. He set his mug down too hard, enough that some of the coffee sloshed over the rim. It burned his hand. Damn it. She found a towel in the overhead cupboard and offered it to him. Here. He took it and dried his hand. Thanks. They returned to the command center, where McBride was trying to pry information out of a reticent Sagara. But why would the Wasp be heading northeast? It doesn't make sense. That was their assigned route, Sagara said. DeMont took her chair again. Hammond slumped in his own, avoiding eye contact. Wasn't most of the hurricane damage in the Western Caribbean? McBride said. You're fixating on the wrong things, Sagara said. McBride pressed on. We don't know that. We have no idea what's behind this. I have a suspicion. Would you care to share it? Sagara paused and looked at each of them in turn. I think the most likely scenario is a hostile act by a foreign power. As in a country? Hammond asked. Or a terrorist organization. Either way, it was an act of war. I'm sure the military would love to find enemy combatants responsible, McBride said. Sagara frowned at him. This is a state-of-the-art warship we're talking about. Plenty of ships have gone missing in the Triangle. Not Navy ships. I thought there was a new possible explanation for Triangle disappearances, Hammond said. Bomb clouds or something. That was in 2016, based on some NASA images showing honeycomb-shaped clouds over the Triangle region, McBride said. Supposedly, they could create strong downdrafts. Hammond pointed at him. Yes, that's what it was, air bombs. Microburst is the technical term, DeMont said. Sure, microbursts, whatever, Hammond said. That sounded like a jab, but she pretended not to notice. They're blamed for several airliner crashes. Pan Am Flight 759, Delta Flight 191, a few others. Could they destroy a battleship? Hammond asked. Warship, Sagara corrected. And doubtful. DeMont shook her head. Pan Am 759 hit a microburst just after takeoff. Delta 191 was landing. Both of them were below 1,000 feet. That was always the most delicate part of air travel, leaving the ground and trying to return to it. That was when 90% of accidents happened. So that's not a great fit, Hammond said. What about the methane bubbling up from the seafloor? McBride laughed. You know, kid, I've got a bridge I'd like to sell you. Come on, that's no good either, Hammond protested. It takes frozen methane gas. You won't find much in the Caribbean. Damn, well, I'm all out of theories. Debating the proposed explanations is not our purpose here. Sagara gestured to the waterproof cases that line the room. This is everything we have on Bermuda Triangle disappearances. Well, I've taken a look at some of the drives and we have a shit ton of data, Hammond said. Where do we even start? We are working under the assumption that all of the disappearances are connected, McBride said. If that's true, then we should start with the big one, Flight 19. That's too old to be relevant, Sagara said. If you were an airman instead of a sailor, something tells me you'd feel differently. Fine, take your Flight 19. At least he'd be out of the way. I'll start with the newest recordings, Hammond interjected. The audio quality will be better. I'll pull up the NTSB data, DeMont said. They should have preliminary reports at least. Good. I'll work on the WASP, Sagara said. Because the WASP is all that matters. Hammond was eager to go through some new recordings. He still couldn't get the sound of that little girl's voice out of his head. He'd never met her, and the incident happened years ago, but the feeling of loss still hit him like a punch to the gut. The more he thought about it, the worse he felt. This is going to paralyze me if I keep obsessing over it. He took a breath and forced himself to start working. Each plastic tote held 4 high-capacity solid-state drives nestled in foam. Based on the number of totes, it was more data than he'd ever seen in one place. Luckily, all the drives used the same file system, so he set up his rig to daisy-chain them all into a single meta drive. Absolute gravy. He started with a search of the months surrounding Olivia's disappearance. The Cessna's disappearance. He corrected himself. No need to let everyone know how much Sagara's test recording had gotten to him. The trouble was, there was a lot of data. Far too much to screen manually, even at 2x speed. I need my secret weapon. Back when he was running Trilobite, he'd written a search algorithm for audio files. He never told the FBI about it. They did enough surveillance as it was. But the algorithm was on his rig, and it would help. He launched the executable, pointed it to the daisy chain drives, and gave it 2 keywords, orange and golden. Matching audio files began trickling in. Bingo. He cracked his knuckles and dove in. He gave each of them a quick listen at 2x speed with his headphones. A lot of them were red herrings, transmissions that used orange or golden incidentally. Then he came to one that sounded interesting, from a drive labeled Maritime Transmissions. It was staticky as hell, as if there were interference, but he could make out most of it.
This is cargo ship Greatland. To anyone who could read us, we've lost satellite navigation. We're in a dense fog northeast of the Bahamas. Over. This is cargo ship Greatland. Still no navigation. We're seeing golden lights, almost a glowing city.
The name of the ship sounded vaguely familiar, but Hammond couldn't quite place it. He cleared his throat. Hey, guys. I might have something. DeMont took off her headphones, visibly eager. Sagara was more reserved but left the workstation and came over. Hammond turned up the speakers and played the audio. Did you hear that? Hammond asked when it had ended. Sagara frowned. There's a lot of static. He mentioned a golden city, DeMont said. Hammond pointed at her. Exactly. What vessel was that, and what happened to it? Sagara asked. The Greatland disappeared in 1986, McBride said. There was a Category 4 hurricane in the Triangle region at the time. Everyone assumed that's what sank it. Sagara drummed his fingers on the table. Is there more audio from this ship? I'm not sure, Hammond said. I only found it because I ran a search for the words orange and golden. What kind of search? Uh-oh. He'd painted himself neatly into this corner. Well, that's the wrong question, McBride interjected. Sagara shot him an irritated look. What? McBride smiled, but in an almost predatory way. The right question is, how do we have bridge recordings from a ship whose wreckage was never found? Demont blinked and shook her head. Say what now? They never found the Greatland, McBride said. There was an extensive search with submarines and everything, but this was before modern GPS. The search area was massive. So how is it that we have the recordings? Those were radio transmissions from the ship, Hammond said. Maybe it's a recording from whoever received them. It would explain the static, Demont said. Maybe the only problem is there were no records of any transmissions from the Greatland. McBride fixed his gaze on Sagara, who had fallen silent. Something tells me the Admiral can offer an explanation. Hammond looked at Sagara. Demont did too. His face was stony, unreadable. It's classified. Of course, McBride said. I have security clearance, Demont said. And I have a gag order, McBride added. Hammond had clearances and a gag order as well, but he went a different way. Come on, man, we're supposed to be a team. To her credit, Demont jumped right in. It will be hard to be effective if you withhold information. Sagara threw up his hands. Fine. Add this to the list of things you're never allowed to talk about. Are you familiar with SOSUS? Even if Hammond hadn't known about it for work reasons, he'd read more than a share of Tom Clancy novels. That's our network of hydrophone arrays that listen for submarines. Worst kept secret in the U.S. military, McBride said. I thought it was mostly between Greenland and Europe, Hammond said. Western Electric built a demonstration system in the Bahamas in 1950 to test its capabilities before deployment in the North Atlantic Basin, the Admiral said. Officially, it was decommissioned the next year. McBride said. And what about unofficially? Unofficially, it operates as a passive listening network in U.S. territorial waters. I suppose it can pick up radio transmissions, Hammond said. It can pick up what a cruise ship passenger is ordering for dinner. Jeez. No wonder there were so many drives. McBride's grin nearly split his face. I suppose I should say congratulations, Admiral. You certainly put the big in Big Brother. Aside from uncovering a state secret, Hammond's discovery didn't add much by itself. 2 vessels that went missing years apart and reported colorful lights hardly broke the Bermuda Triangle mystery wide open. He began sifting through the other results from his audio search. There were dozens of them, more than he could run down alone, so he asked McBride to work with him. Then he swallowed his pride and asked Demont to help too. They set up a little system. He'd play the audio, McBride would provide the necessary background, and then Demont would dig out the NTSB report. Working in this fashion, they identified 2 more ships and 4 airplanes that had gone missing after reporting the visual anomaly, as Hammond was calling it. That made 7 incidents in the last 40 or so years. None of them, however, offered any clarity on what the golden light might be. Sagara got a call on his sat phone and stomped out, only to return 10 minutes later with the 2 sailor guards bringing in more totes. Delivery time. God, there's even more? Hammond asked. These are from the latest disappearances. The female sailor, Miller, plunked down the tub she'd carried in. Johnson carried 2 of them, stacked, and eased them to the floor beside it. They nodded to Sagara on their way out. Hammond got the newest cases loaded while the others took a breather. Demont brought him back a mug of coffee from the mess. Bless you, he whispered. It was exactly what he needed. He got his second wind and had the audio queued up by the time Sagara opened the first case file. To the Navy's credit, they'd given the most recent disappearances the full court press. GPS coordinates, search grids, flight plans, everything. This was a Trilander private plane that took off from the Dominican Republic 10 days ago, the Admiral said. 18 souls aboard, as you'd say. He handed everyone a copy of the preliminary NTSB report, which totaled 3 one-sided pages. It's a little thin, Hammond said. The full investigation will take at least a month, Dumont said. Hammond snickered. Those slackers. He smiled to take the sting out of it. She didn't rise to the bait. Good work takes time. We have some tracking data from the plane's GPS receiver. Segarra brought it up on the smartboard. Not bad for an old guy. The GPS route traced a short line from the Dominican Republic heading northwest for 2 data points, and then north-northwest for another point. That was it. How long was the flight? Hammond asked. Santo Domingo to Miami in this aircraft would take about 3 hours, Dumont answered without looking up from the report. It dropped off radar somewhere east of Turks and Caicos. She looked up from a report to the smartboard and harumphed. That's strange. They shouldn't have been that far east. There's something about Turks and Caicos in the flight plan, Segarra said. But they're bound for Miami, which is almost precisely northwest of Santo Domingo. Why are they headed north-northwest? Maybe they weren't really bound for Miami, McBride said. Dumont frowned. That's the flight plan they filed. McBride spread out his hands. You've got a private jet coming out of Santo Domingo. Could be drugs, guns, even human trafficking. Maybe, Dumont said, but she looked unconvinced. 2 loud beeps from Segarra's sat phone prevented further debate. That was a new ringtone, probably for an incoming message. He read the screen, frowned, and dialed without leaving the room. It's Segarra. How credible is your intel on this? A pause, and then, who has him? Another pause. Let them know I'm coming, and send the boat. Thanks. He hung up and looked at them, and for a moment Hammond thought he wasn't going to say anything. Was that your dry cleaner? McBride asked. Segarra ignored him. We recovered a pilot. Of what? Dumont asked. The Beechcraft plane that went missing 3 days ago. He was just plucked from the ocean. Alive? Hammond asked. For the moment. I'm going to find out if he can answer any questions. McBride cleared his throat. Don't you mean we're going? Segarra blinked. I assumed you 3 were running down the disappearances. A live witness is far more important than some old cockpit recordings, McBride said. Dumont chewed her lip. He's not wrong. First-hand testimony could be quite valuable. It doesn't take 4 people to interrogate a witness. Segarra looked at each of them in turn. Hammond, get your gear. Dumont shook her head. I need him. We're still going through audio. She needs me. He basked in the simple honesty of those words. Suddenly, he felt bad about being so brusque with her. It wasn't like she was the NTSB investigator who'd screwed up the inquiry into Amanda's death. And I need her, obviously, to make sense of the most recent disappearances. But you know who we could spare? McBride made his voice gruff, in a fair imitation of Segarra. McBride, get your gear. Then back to his own voice. Yes, Vice Admiral, right away, sir. He hurried out. Segarra shook his head, as if in denial. What just happened? Have fun, you two? Dumont cracked a rare smile. Hammond echoed it. Yeah, call if you're going to be late, will you? Can't believe I came out of retirement for this, Segarra said. After Segarra and McBride left, the command center felt quieter and calmer, just the way Dumont liked it. She and Hammond worked well together, mostly because he was learning when not to talk. When she got deep into reading a report or pulling up aircraft specs, he'd slip on his headphones and sift through the AV recordings. They ran down the case of a ferry that went missing 2 days after the second hurricane, and then a private plane with a husband-wife pilot team that went missing between Bermuda and Miami. The latter was especially chilling. The couple was returning from a week-long honeymoon, reportedly in good spirits, but never made it home. Their last transmission came about an hour after takeoff, and reported some lower than expected clouds, but little else. That's all we have on audio, Hammond said. I'll pull up the GPS. Demont, reading, didn't look up until she heard him make a kind of surprise sound. What? He gestured at the smartboard, which displayed the usual map and a flight line out of Bermuda heading west-southwest. Near the end of the tracking line, it made an abrupt turn to the northwest. Another route deviation? She asked. Seems that way. Strange. It looked a lot like the ferry's course before they lost tracking. I think there's a pattern here. God, I hope so. Everything seems random to me. Maybe he was right, but Demont could see the pieces in her head, and they nearly fit together. 3 components. First, there's an equipment malfunction, usually involving navigation. Second, there's what you've been calling the visual anomaly. He smiled. Glad to have contributed, but what's the third component? The fog. It's consistently a feature of the disappearances. Are you sure? I can only think of a couple. They don't always say the word fog. But whenever she investigated disappearances, she always put the reports and transcripts in her head a certain way. Remember Olivia's flight? He winced. I wish I didn't. The cloud ceiling was 2,000 feet lower than it should have been, similar to what we heard for this flight, and 2 other pilots reported a sudden loss of visibility. Is that a big deal? It depends. Do you know what the average life expectancy of a pilot who flies into a cloud and isn't instrument rated? No. 178 seconds. Geez, seriously? An untrained pilot on instrument conditions is a state of emergency. All right, point taken. But how does that help us? The pattern just tells us what to look for. The missing piece, she'd like to call it. There was almost always something to find, a piece of information that, when plugged in, explained everything. The fog doesn't get us anywhere, nor does your visual anomaly. Maybe the equipment malfunction does. His eyes widened at that. Either he thought she was onto something, or totally crazy. Maybe both. What about sabotage? I don't see how it could be that. All of the ships and planes seem to be operating normally just before their disappearances. Not at the end, though. He pointed at the Honeymooners' flight route. That gave her an idea. How smart is this smartboard? What do you mean? Can you overlay the tracking we've had from all disappearances? He frowned. I think so, but just do it. She saw the look on his face and added, Please. He shrugged. All right, give me a minute. While he worked on that, Demont figured out the vectors. Vessel, origin, destination, and deviation. The smartboard went completely black. Hammond cursed at the keyboard and tapped a few more keys. The map returned, this time with the routes overlaid. I need a straight edge, Demont said. Hammond jogged out and returned a minute later with a broom handle. Found this in the mess. It'll work. Let's start with the Honeymooners. She took the stick from him and put one end across the plane's route at the point of the deviation. It veers off in a different direction, Hammond said. I know. The deviation is the pilot's reaction. I'm working on what caused that reaction. The only thing in the plane or ship that relied on natural forces rather than technology was the magnetic compass. What if his compass was wrong? If we look at how he changed course and where he wanted to go, we can extrapolate. She checked her numbers, then traced a line along the broomstick's edge using the smart marker, producing a line that ran roughly southeast of the route. There. That's his magnetic north, she said. But it's not facing north. Exactly, I'm working backward. Based on where he wanted to go and the heading he changed to, this is what his compass must have looked like. All right. Hammond coded the line in bright red and labeled it Demont's crazy idea. Thanks, she said dryly. Don't mention it. She did the Trilander jet next, working out apparent north based on the turn that took them east of Turks and Caicos. Totally different vector from the Honeymooners' course. Hammond coded that line in bright red too, Then DeMont did the cargo ship. Traced the vector of its imaginary compass, not thinking too much about where the line went. Lastly, the Wasp, whose GPS route was the most precise and showed the slightest course deviation. The new vector thus almost ran north. She stood back next to Hammond and looked at the result. "Holy shit," Hammond whispered. The bright red vectors originated from different spots and had different angles, but they all intersected one another at a single point in an empty stretch of ocean between San Juan and Bermuda, northeast of Turks and Caicos, directly in the middle of the right side of the Bermuda Triangle. Vice Admiral Segarra had dealt with more than his share of bureaucratic bullshit, but this one took the cake. There was a tropical storm brewing in the South Atlantic, and the choppy seas made for a rough passage. If his weather reports were accurate, it was only going to get worse. The boat ride from San Juan had taken twice as long as it should have, with McBride buzzing incessantly in his ear the whole time. Of all the goddamn civilians to land on my team. They made port in San Juan, only to find that the survivor had been moved from the Coast Guard station to San Juan City Hospital. Segarra's Navy credentials failed to impress the women at the nurses' station, so it took 3 more phone calls and another half hour before they found the right hospital room. A dark-haired woman in an FBI jacket was leaning against the wall outside it and moved casually to bar their way. "This is a restricted area." Segarra recognized her. Special Agent Chen. Now he understood why they'd moved the pilot to a city hospital. Federal Bureau of Interference. She showed her teeth in what might have been a smile. "Vice Admiral Segarra, what a pleasant surprise." It was neither pleasant nor a surprise, but Segarra elected not to say so. "I need to talk to the survivor." "What about?" "You know what about." "The survivor, as you call him, filed a false flight manifest, and his pilot's license is expired. Do you know what that means?" "Enlighten me," Segarra said. "It means he's probably smuggling something illegal over U.S. territorial waters." "Oh, so that's how you're claiming jurisdiction. It's creative, I'll give you that." "I thought so," Chen said. "Unfortunately, we have bigger problems than some 2-bit smuggler." She nodded, betraying no reaction one way or the other. Then she looked past him. "Who's your friend?" "He's nobody," Segarra said. McBride made a choking noise. "I wouldn't say exactly nobody, Admiral." He stepped closer and offered his hand. "Alistair McBride, at your service." Chen smiled viciously and looked at Segarra. "Some crack team you've assembled, Segarra." "It wasn't my choice," Segarra could have said, but that would only encourage her. Feds like Chen love to create fractures, all the better to slip their tentacles in. "Are you going to let us in? Or do you need to get a call from your superiors?" "You kidnapped my analyst." So that's what this was about. She was pissed he'd recruited Hammond. "He came willingly, and I'm just borrowing him." "Where is he?" she demanded. "You know I can't answer that." "When I couldn't reach him, I thought maybe—" Shit. He hadn't considered the possibility that someone might jump to conclusions, especially his FBI handler. "That's on me. We were under a time crunch." He checked his watch. "We still are." She softened a fraction. "How's he holding up?" "He's been solid." "Good," she sighed, and moved aside to let them pass. 10 minutes. Segarra fought to keep from frowning at her as he slid past, McBride on his heels. A man lay on the hospital bed within, surrounded by machines that beeped or hissed at regular intervals. He was maybe mid-30s, sandy-haired, with an angry red tint to his skin, sunburned by Segarra's guess. 2 days floating in the Caribbean would do that. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged at best. Blood pressure 103/68. Not a good sign. His eyes were open but unfocused. The Admiral approached the bed. "Hey there. My name's David Segarra. You've had a rough couple of days." No reaction. Maybe the man hadn't heard him. "Are we sure he speaks English?" McBride whispered. "He's from Florida." "That doesn't mean anything." Segarra put a hand on his shoulder. "Can you hear us, son?" The touch roused the man, and he looked up, met their eyes, but seemed confused. "Who are you?" "We're investigating your accident. Can you tell us what happened?" The pilot drew a deep, unsteady breath. "Everything went wrong." "Was there a mechanical malfunction?" "Engine choked on bad fuel, and the compass," the man panted, "kept changing on me. Then I hit the fog and thought there was an island. Saw these glowing lights." The effort to speak drained him. He leaned back against his bed. A nurse bustled in and began scolding them for harassing her patient. That's when Segarra's sat phone rang, earning him yet another flurry of criticism. He excused himself to the hallway and looked at the screen. Why the hell is Johnson calling? He'd left explicit instructions to the sailors not to call unless it was a dire emergency. He answered. "Go for Segarra." "Sorry about this, sir," said the big master-at-arms. "They said it was important." A new voice intruded. "Hey, it's Hammond." "What the hell is this, Hammond?" "We have a location." He thought maybe he'd misheard, or else Hammond had gotten into the base's alcohol stores. A location for what? For whatever caused those disappearances. Dumont worked it out. Something about screwing with our magnetic compass. Compass? That was what the survivor had mentioned. How did she get a location? Hammond explained it once and Dumont twice, but Segarra still wasn't sure he understood. Even so, he could hear the confidence in their voices and the undertone of excitement. They might really have it. He told them to run it again, just to be sure. Then he hung up and hustled back into the room. McBride sat by the pilot's bedside, with a hand on the pilot's arm in a comforting sort of way. The pilot had his eyes closed and they were speaking together. Maybe Segarra was crazy, but it sounded like the tail end of an Our Father. McBride stirred. "What's the story?" "Hammond and Dumont believe they have a location for the source of navigation issues in the Triangle." "What? How?" "I couldn't explain it if I wanted to. They've got some vectors, and they converge at a point about 500 miles north of the island facility." McBride dropped the pilot's hand. "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's get out there." "We're not jaunting off to some mystery location, McBride. I haven't even seen the data." "You've got two incredibly smart people back there. When are you going to start trusting them?" Damn. He hated that McBride had a point. "It's not a matter of trust. We have no independent evidence to support this. It could be a red herring." "Come on, Admiral, this is the break we've been waiting for. There's a tropical storm brewing out in the Atlantic. All the more reason to hurry. We'll need to beat that storm if we're going to find that ship." The pilot jolted awake, startling them. "Ship!" "Easy, man. Take it easy." McBride tried to settle the man back onto his bed, but without success. The pilot looked right at Segarra. His eyes suddenly had focus. "There was a Navy ship." "Where?" Segarra demanded. "In the fog." The pilot's eyes rolled back in his head. He collapsed against the bed, and the shrill tone of alarms from his monitors rose to a deafening pitch. He was coding out. The crash team burst in and chased both Segarra and McBride out. McBride's eyes were wide in shock. "How's that for independent evidence?" "I can't believe I'm about to say this." Segarra straightened his shirt. "McBride, get your gear. We're leaving tomorrow at sunrise."
You're listening to The Triangle, narrated by Neil Helligers. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm. Listen away. The Triangle is written by Dan Cobalt, Mary McGinnis, and Sylvius Bruck Wrigley. Executive produced by Molly Barton and Julian Yap. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.